It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. And Logan, we promised the people earlier in the week one of two options for this podcast. We were either going to do a mock draft or we were going to do our annual crossover episode with my other podcast, my fitness podcast, Train with the Best. And guess what? We're doing Secret Door number 3.
Yeah, surprise for everyone involved, right?
Surprise, surprise. We had some scheduling stuff. And then also just there's a ton of free agency adjacent news happening. This will be our last podcast that we can really get in before free agency opens. On that note, next week, we have no idea what our schedule is because the league year opens on Monday, or the legal tampering period opens on Monday. League year opens on Wednesday. So all the stuff will go down. And to do a free agency preview Monday morning, for instance, when we typically record, that could be dated by noon and the time it actually hits your feeds, feels very silly. So we're not going to do that. So hopefully there's some stuff that happens for Washington early on in that legal tampering window. We can do a reaction maybe Tuesday morning, get that into your feeds ASAP. There's also a chance that between now and then, guys like Zach Ertz, Bobby Wagner, Jeremy Chin, any of the other incumbents could re-sign. That can happen all the way through Monday. So there is stuff to still watch, but things are happening. And for all we know, we're going to get breaking news as we record here. And because of that, Logan, I will tell the people it is currently 1:27 Eastern time on Wednesday, March 5th. And 90 seconds before we were going to hit record, DK Metcalf requested a trade. About 10 minutes before that, Tyler Lockett was released by the Seahawks. And we also have the Christian Kirk news. So we're going to get into that first. We'll get into the rest of the free agency preview after that. And then Dane Brugler's latest mock draft is really interesting in terms of what happens for Washington. So we're going to close out with a little draft talk here on the show. Any more preamble that we want to do, Logan, or should we just get down to business?
No, I mean, we just got a lot of stuff to do. You know, just we were talking in the production meeting. It's like you got free agency coming up. You got kind of a draft, combine review. It's just like a lot of names, a lot of people. We're going to do our best to kind of give, you know, like a little, you know, overarching theme here going into free agency next week.
You know, we do something on the radio show called Vibe Check Tuesday. This is almost like a Vibe Check pre-free agency edition of
It does feel that way, doesn't it?
So how do you feel? All right, let's get into it. Let's start off with the Metcalf one first because, frankly, he's the biggest lightning rod, and it's the one that is most recent. He has now requested a trade, according to Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network, and I have made my feelings on DK Metcalf quite clear, Logan, on the radio show. I am so far beyond not interested in having DK Metcalf be a Washington Commander. I realize the appeal, but I'm not interested for reasons that I can get into. But before I go on my diatribe to whatever extent version it's going to happen today, what are your thoughts on DK Metcalf specifically for Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I like good football players. I like playmakers and understand why people are drawn to that. Like, he's one of those guys to me that when you look at him, he's got everything physically that you could possibly want. I mean, he's one of one. You know, he's incredibly fast. He's big. He's got long arms. He plays with decent physicality. Like, I think the one thing I would say is that I think the numbers and the stuff that surround him, like the hype around his name, probably lead fans to be more excited about him than they probably should be. And what I mean by that is, like, he is a big guy. He doesn't always play like a big guy. He doesn't run the best routes. He's not great in and out of his cuts. He's kind of a limited route tree. And I think back to when he's been most successful and he's running, you know, like goes and deep posts. And I do think, like, if he were to come to Washington, he would bring an element that would be great. He would be really nice to have in terms of the ability, kind of like what Tyreek Hill did when he was in Kansas City, the ability to kind of stretch you vertically to open up horizontal windows, right? And that would allow Terry to do more Terry stuff, like, you know, run these deep crossers, run the deep dig, you know, run the go. He could still do all that stuff, but it would allow, I think it would give Terry some flexibility that he hasn't had here in a while because of the vertical juice that DK Metcalf brings. Now, my issue is that he's making $20 million a year or whatever he's making, whatever that number is. So you're trading for the contract. He probably wants an extension. And if you're going to utilize him that way to maximize Terry, why not draft a younger player that is a similar skill set? I think about Thornton from Tennessee. He's 6'5", he's 210. He ran a 4.3 at the combine. He's got decent length. He's like got 33-inch arms. He's a big guy too. And you know what he's good at? He's good at running posts and goes. But you know how much he's going to cost you? Probably like a 3rd-round draft pick, maybe a 4th-round draft pick. And that, to me, in terms of cost and roster construction, is probably much more valuable long-term to the team. So that's kind of where I've fallen. And I think there's this again, I like DK. I enjoy watching him probably from 3 years ago better than I did over the last 2 years. And I think that speaks to kind of how he's changed and some of his limitations as a route runner and as a player. That doesn't mean he doesn't add value. It's just, what value are you looking for? And is that value worth the price tag? And I'm going to say this too, also kind of the headache, I guess is the word I'm going to use, like kind of the person, right? So to me, like, I understand that's exciting and fans get excited. I understand why they're excited. And I understand schematically why it would be a nice ad. But I'm also kind of like, I feel like there's easier ways, maybe better ways to get that done.
Far more efficient ways that come with far less of a headache and far less of a price tag. Yeah. And this is where, like, it's really hard to talk about players like DK Metcalf, because DK Metcalf is a really good NFL football player who makes your offense in a vacuum better. Mm-hmm. He's also not worth taking on. Worth both in the contractual value and the potential headache. And that is just something that Washington can do better in other places. And so, again, it's not that DK Metcalf isn't a good football player, but he's not a 6'4" size guy like he is on paper. It's just not who he is. And in fact, I would tell you, he's kind of a worse version of Terry McLaurin. Like, he's a guy like the role that Terry has taken on. Now, Terry, I think, has improved greatly over the years. And, you can see that in the catch numbers and things, where DK had the one monster season in 2022. He was targeted 141 times and got 90 catches for just over 1,000 yards. The last two seasons, he's got 66 catches a season. And sure, 2 years ago, it was for 1,100 yards. Good deep ball season. Also, I think people think that he's like underrated because they think Geno Smith isn't very good, and that's not remotely true. Yeah. Like Geno's a really high level, like top half level NFL quarterback. So no, like, he's playing with a pro. Would he be better with Jaden Daniels? Of course, but he's played with a pretty darn good quarterback. And so if you're telling me that you need someone to complement Terry, I don't want essentially a worse version of Terry. And that's before you get to the headache side of it. So again, is DK Metcalf a good football player? Yes. Don't come in my mentions. Don't come in my comments saying you said DK sucks. I didn't say DK sucks. I said he's not worth bringing to Washington based off where they are in terms of their resource allocation, what it would take, and what they are trying to build in their locker room. That's where I'm at on DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. And is there value? Yes. I just think it's about, is it worth it? Is it worth the other stuff? And if he was playing, and again, and I think, just go watch the film. Like, he's not the most detailed route runner. He's not, going to win all these 50-50 contested catches like you think he would. He doesn't track the ball super well. Like, he's a big explosive dude. And big explosive people, you want them on your team because they create space. And I think that's what he would be doing. And again, we've seen how explosive he can be with the ball in his hands. It's just not with the same regularity as some of these other top guys. Like, I love the height, weight, speed. Again, I love some of the physical stuff you see as a blocker, but again, it's not consistent enough for me right now. And again, it may be a change of scenery is what you want, but I don't know if I want to bet on that. And I think when you look at what Adam Peters has done so well, is he's identified people that fit the Washington culture. This pending trade, as reported by Adam Schefter, obviously for Deebo Samuel, like, it makes a lot of sense to me, even though Deebo has some of the same limitations, as a route runner. Like, there's no doubt about the man's competitiveness and how he's going to fit with this team. So I think that's another element here that I think fans often overlook. And again, it's, if you were to sign here, I'd be happy. But I also understand that, like, to me, it probably shouldn't be the priority that I think a lot of fans at least have presented to me.
No, for sure. And, like, again, Deebo's a guy that's a good complementary piece because he does the stuff that Terry doesn't do. And like, Terry can do everything. Terry's an elite player. That's kind of the nature of it. But, like, where's Terry at his best? Getting vertical down the field, using that speed. And then what kind of space does that create underneath? A space for, like, good zone players, which is what they did last year, right? Guys like Olamide Zaccheaus, etc. Except for the Deebo, when he's remotely healthy, is the deluxe version of that. So it fits of, like, okay, Deebo's not your guy that's going to beat man-to-man coverage. Terry's your guy for that, and then that's also why you bring back Zach Ertz. Those are your two guys on 3rd and 7. Got to have it. Those are my primary guys. But a guy like Deebo on 1st and 2nd down can take advantage of that space, get in those spaces, catch the ball, and then make a guy miss. And now you've generated both an easy button and an explosive play at the same time, which is kind of a goal of NFL offense. As far as a speed guy, though, that could loosen up defenses in a way for Terry, What do we think about Tyler Lockett? He's a really interesting guy because he's been an elite, talk about like the ability to track the football deep. He's been one of the best at that. He and Russell Wilson, the connection they had earlier in their careers was incredible. But he's now going to be entering his age 33 season. Last season, he played in all 17 games, was targeted 74 times at 49 catches for 600 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Where I know this is fresh, so you haven't done like any kind of deep film dive on Tyler Lockett, but the idea of Tyler Lockett, does that intrigue you at all?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Tyler Lockett. I think he does the route running stuff of the receiver position at a high level. I think the thing you lose with him a little bit is the kind of down to down competitiveness. And I don't want to say he's not a competitor, but I just think he's 33 years old. He's not going to kind of play super hard all the time. He's not going to block the same way he used to. He gets down, he doesn't fight for those extra yards. If they were to get him in here at the right number, that's the thing about free agency and seeing some of these good players get cut. I think it's the same thing you saw like last year with Austin Eckler, for example, right? He's a free agent. You get him at a good value. He kind of outperforms the value of his contract. But if you were to bring him at a number that he was playing at the year prior, it wouldn't work, right? It just would be like, this isn't what this is not that the value isn't there. And so maybe if you get him at a number that feels right for your team and your organization, and again, he's a good football player. Like that's the thing. And it's the same thing with DK, honestly. Like if DK came in and he's like, yeah, I'll play here for 10, like great. Like that's exactly what you want.
Totally different conversation.
Totally different conversation. I think that's the way I feel about Tyler Lockett too. If you can get him in here and maybe it's 15 for Tyler Lockett because he's a little bit more diverse, but that's kind of how I feel. It's like I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze at the contract number that he wants. And so that's where like other names that have been cut are a little bit more interesting to me at this point because I think they have more tread on the tire. I think they've got more vertical juice. I think they have more kind of competitive toughness at this point. And again, that's not to say Tyler Lockett's not a tough football player. Just stylistically, in order to play 17 games at a smaller body size, he can't do some of the things you need him to do or that he would need to do in this offense.
For sure. And like Tyler Lockett might be worth $15 million. I would not, if I was Adam Peters, pay Tyler Lockett $15 million because you're already going to extend Terry. You're paying Debo 17 for this year. Like it's not that like the Debo contract they can take on. They have plenty of room. I told this to a caller yesterday. I was like, there's no guy that they're not going to be able to afford because they're paying Debo Samuel 17. Even if in an ideal world, Debo at this point is more of like a $14-15 million player. That extra $2, $3, $4 million is probably not going to hurt you. But if you double down on that again in that receiver room, not to mention you need space for some young guys to get in there and develop because Debo might be a 1 year, if not, he's probably a 2 or 3 year guy at absolute most. Like you need space on this roster for younger guys. So if Tyler Lockett is suddenly available for $5 million, okay, well, hell yeah, I want to have that discussion. But if he's going to be going and getting $15 million, that's a different story. Last guy that I want to talk about in this realm, though, is maybe the guy that is most intriguing for a number of reasons, and that's Christian Kirk. I would probably be more interested this time last week before the Debo trade because they both are primarily slot players in terms of alignment. But Christian Kirk has a history with Cliff Kingsbury. He's got some juice. He's a little bit younger. He's not young, but he's younger than Lockett. How interested are you or not, and what kind of number will we be talking about to be interested in Christian Kirk?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in Christian Kirk, and I don't know numbers necessarily. I'd have to look at the market in terms of free agency, but I really think he has tremendous value. I think he does a great job winning from the slot. He wins in a more like conventional, fluid way than Debo does. Obviously, he does not the yards after catch monster that Debo is, but I think that's something that I look at and I'm like, he plays the receiver position the way you want him to play it, like with great fundamentals, great cut technique, attacks the football, good hands, can win multiple ways, can play multiple spots. I do kind of feel some of your same consternation or some of your same reservation because it's like, I think he's at his best when he's lining up in multiple spots, which is kind of what Debo's role would be. Do I think he can play outside? Yes, but do I think you're kind of not getting the best version of Christian Kirk if you do that? That's also yes. So I think he's tremendous. I think he's physical. I think he's smart. I think he's intuitive. All of those things are true. But again, like what's the role look like now here? Is he kind of your true Z or your true 2 here? And he can survive there kind of in the same way that Zacchaeus did. And he's got a little bit more juice than Zacchaeus, a little bit more versatility, but it just seems like he would be asking for kind of a big payday or more money than you'd be willing to worth for a guy that's not going to be able to be maximized because of Debo's positioning in the offense. And again, this is not something that's important to put out. With Debo, you still need a true slot. You still need a true like win on third down slot guy. And so maybe he could be that. But again, you can't have two guys in the slot that are making over $10 million is kind of my view on it. And I think Christian Kirk's market, based on what he did, maybe not this year, but the year prior, should be above $10 million. It's kind of my initial gut reaction. And that's not knowing a lot about the receiver market at the moment.
Yeah, this will be, which by the way, the receiver market could be all over the freaking place this year. This feels, I was having this discussion with someone the other day, like this feels like the kind of the weirdest free agent market I can remember in the last couple of years. Like there are guys that you can tell me they can make 5 million, they can make 15 million, and I would be like, sure, fine. Oh, that guy making 25, sure, why not? Because especially offensively, there just aren't a lot of dudes out there. But we'll get more to that in just a second. Just for some context on Kirk, and frankly on all these guys, Debo included. Kirk last year only played 8 games. He was probably going to get traded at the deadline, maybe even to Washington, and then he got hurt right before. I think it was a shoulder or a collarbone or something. At the time, he had 379 yards, was averaging over 14 yards a reception. The year prior, 12 games, 787. Year prior to that in Jacksonville, 84 catches, 1,100 yards. And then the year before that was his last one in Jacksonville with Cliff, 982 yards. So he has been on pace, if he can just stay healthy these last couple of years, to be a damn near 1,000-yard receiver. But I think it's important to point out, like, Zach Ertz was the second leading receiver on this team last year, and he was about 650 yards. Debo's down year last year included more receiving yards than Zach Ertz. Like the number of receptions, I think was about the same as well. They were kind of in the same range, but it was definitively above, the second best wide receiver on this team, which I think was OZ. I think was the next highest guy. I can look it up in a second. Obviously, Diami came on strong at the end. Noah misses the time, whatever. But like all of these guys that we're talking about would be upgrades. But I think the thing that you have to understand / consider / factor in is the value. Contract wise, not to mention what opportunities are you blocking for younger players to develop. Luke McCaffrey, but also potential draft picks this year that you don't know yet. You don't know if Matthew Golden is going to be available for you at 29 or someone else in the second round. You just don't know when you're going through the free agency thing, but you do kind of have an ideal range of spending for each position group each year. And some of these guys, while they would be upgrades, probably push you above that level. And maybe a little bit above that level is okay because of Jaden's contract, quarterback is going to be so much less expensive. But there are limits. And as we've talked about a ton, there are so many holes to fill, even if it's with its re-signings, that $80 million will disappear semi-quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's always so interesting that people get infatuated with receivers because to me, I think the move in free agency is probably more along the offensive line or defensive line. Like that's where I would be kind of aiming, specifically on the offensive line. And so again, like if you can get a playmaker at the right price, kind of in that second or third wave of free agency, and I think they're re-signed some of the guys that were here. And I think that's the smart, right, correct move moving forward. But I keep thinking like, if there's anything that needs to be taken care of in free agency, it's probably the offensive line somehow. Because again, like you look at the draft, like look what's coming around the corner, right? The offensive line is very weak in this class. And we've talked about on the show a couple developmental prospects. You say, oh, we can get that guy in here and have him sit and develop and he can maybe become a starter. Maybe it's week 6, maybe it's week 7, maybe it's a year from now, whatever. And there are guys like that. But I think that's an important distinction. And with the receiver, there are guys in the second, third, fourth round, maybe in the 5th round. I really think like the value in receiver this year is probably between the 2nd and the 5th round that I think could come in and play in a role like the one you're describing, one where you're kind of offsetting Terry's ability, you're offsetting Debo, what Debo does, you're kind of a friendly target. I think about Higgins from Iowa State, just as an example, kind of a bigger body guy who tests well, good fundamental route runner, has the potential to develop into something more, but is right now just a very solid football player and kind of offsets the group. And I think a lot of people are going to be targeting that type of player, but that's just an example. So with the receiver, I'm always like, man, there's so many plentiful options. Even though this is a down year for receiver, there's a lot of really good football players that you feel like could make this team better. So I don't want to go out and spend a ton of money necessarily, right, to kind of fill this room out when maybe I can get a plus free agent, like that's maybe the second wave, third wave of free agency, like even re-signing OZ, look at what he did last year and how talented he was. And then, so that's where like this gets a little bit, I understand why fans talk about it this way, but that's one where I'm like, you can find a receiver. You can get a receiver that's going to be good. I don't know if you need to overpay when I think there's other positions where I would try to prioritize.
Today's lesson from Professor Paulsen: do not get distracted by the shiny objects. Who else is in free agency? We answer that question next. Then we get into some of the options that may exist in the draft before the end of this episode of Take Command. Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulsen there. And now we get into the non-shiny objects, although somewhere down here there's some shiny objects on the top 100 free agent list. We're going to actually use the top 101 list from NFL.com and Greg Rosenthal to kind of guide our discussion here. And Logan, offensive line, there were some guys a week ago that were available that was like, oh wow, this doesn't happen. There are left tackles, like starting left tackles, that are available. And then they got re-signed. Alaric Jackson goes back to LA. A couple other moves happen. Then you have some of the other offensive line needy teams, specifically the Chicago Bears, being like, we're not waiting for this free agency class. We're not waiting for the draft. We're gonna go make a move. And the Bears actually made two. They traded a 6th rounder for Jonah Jackson, reuniting him with Ben Johnson. He was in Detroit 2 years ago, was in LA last year, wound up getting benched. Didn't play very well, but we'll see if he can be better back with Johnson. And then they take Joe Thuney from Kansas City, older player, but still all pro for, in the last 2 years. He was the guy that saved their bacon to get them to the Super Bowl at left tackle last year, but really, really good guard. They trade a 4th for him. And I think that the general consensus around the league from analyst types is like, this is telling you what teams think of this free agency class, and it's not good on the offensive line.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think, like obviously the ones that, like Alaric Jackson, I think is a really good example. Like he's maybe not a household name, maybe prior to this free agency process, but a guy that is a good starting left tackle in the NFL, and again,
sure.
Like to have him have the opportunity to become available, I think is awesome. You mentioned Ronnie Stanley. If I was going to, put money against it, I'd probably say he resigns with Baltimore because they understand how valuable he is, right? So again, like this is one of the things about the NFL at the moment in terms of personnel that I think is really important to understand. It's that receivers, running backs, even tight ends to a certain extent are relatively easy to find and not necessarily like structurally as important as the offensive line. And what I mean by that is like, yes, you need dynamic playmakers at all spots to be a successful offense. I think the Detroit Lions last year are a great example of that. The Philadelphia Eagles are a great example of that. But I think the one thing that is the backbone of your team is the offensive line. And for whatever reason, I think it probably has to do with kind of the limited offseason structure. We've talked about this a bunch on this show, is it makes it really hard to develop those guys. So you have to find them. You have to steal them from other places. And I think that's what you're seeing here with the Bears. Basically, they're saying like, we need to get better right now. And so again, like this free agency class, I think there are some names. Ronnie Stanley, I think, is kind of the belle of the ball. I think that's kind of a fake name. Walker Little from Jacksonville re-signed with his team, right? All these guys that are good are going to re-sign, right? Cam Robinson is a free agent. He was in Minnesota last year. He was traded from Jacksonville. He has some ability. He would kind of move the needle back to just above average, right? Tevin Jenkins kind of moved the needle just above average. Patrick McCarry is a guy that I think is really interesting because he can play all 5 spots, but has been more of a swing guy over the course of his career. Dan Moore Jr. is a guy that they've constantly been clamoring to upgrade in Pittsburgh since he's been there. And I think he's a good starting player, but he's kind of just an average guy. And then you got like Mekhi Becton, who is he good outside of Philadelphia? And I don't have a great answer for you with that. But those are some of the names. And you kind of go, oh, well, yes, if any one of them came to Washington, that would probably help out. But does it help out to the magnitude that you're hoping a free agent acquisition does? And I think that's why you see teams like the Bears making these splash trades for players that they know are proven commodities, even though they have larger contract values.
Yeah, I think it's also why they probably don't cut Andrew Wiley. I'll say that, and then we'll stop on recording, and they'll cut Andrew Wiley. But are you going to find a better replacement for him, especially for $10 million? Like,
that's
not
the thing. Let's talk. Like,
class.
I think that's the thing. When you watch, I don't know why. I think it's probably because of last year, right?
Yes.
Like everyone
100%.
Everyone's really frustrated with Andrew Wiley. But when you watch the film this year, it's like he's a good starting right tackle in the NFL.
Yeah.
A lot of teams would feel very comfortable with him, and especially at the price tag. Like that's the other thing. The price tag is the thing that makes this thing so incredible. Right? He's playing pretty good ball, and he's at a really good contract value. To me, he's outplaying his contract value, which is maybe a crazy thing to say, but that's just my opinion. But,
right. And to be clear, so like he's making $10 million. Let's say you're getting $12 million of production. No one's trying to tell you that he's a $28 million tackle.
Correct.
And those exist in the NFL. Like those are the top flight guys. No one is trying to tell you that he's great. And this is in a way like, is Andrew Wiley as good at tackle as DK is at receiver? No. But like we have a really hard time discussing guys that aren't great but are good. Yeah. Right. And I think that he's distinctly in that category where it's like, can you upgrade on Andrew Wiley? Hell yeah, you can upgrade on Andrew Wiley. Can you do a lot worse than Andrew Wiley? Oh, buddy, you can do way, way worse than Andrew Wiley.
I think that's a perfect way of saying it. So, again, that's something where you look at the landscape of the offensive line for the Commanders right now. I think you feel good about Wiley. Obviously, Cosby's coming off the knee. You feel good at Biotish. And I think you feel good about Allegretti in some type of capacity, whether he's the swing guy inside or whether he's kind of holding down the fort till Cosby gets back. But I think we've talked about this a ton. You need to find a way to get more talented. And I think some of those names I just mentioned get you more talented. But do they get you more talented in a correlation to how much you have to pay them? That's the thing with these guys that I think is the issue. And I think I go back to the Bears because I think this is a really interesting kind of, again, case study example is they're going out and getting guys that are good at their positions. Like Tooney is an excellent guard. He's going to come in and make that group instantly better. And he generally plays right in line with his, $23 million salary, whatever he's getting this year.
Yeah.
So I think that this is where, and it's hard because I do think Washington has to make some type of move here. It's just the players that are going to move the needle more than their contract value, the Alaric Jacksons, the Walker Littles, the Ronnie Stanleys. Ronnie Stanley hasn't re-signed yet, but for the purposes of this, I'm assuming he's going to. They're not available. So you're going to kind of have to go pursue a guy that's just slightly above average, and you're going to have to pay him, I feel like, a lot of money because that's how the offensive line market is. And again, this is not the best. I think there are some talented pieces in the draft, but this is, again, why this landscape is such a minefield, I think, and one of the reasons why it's one of the more interesting chess pieces in terms of position with regards to this offseason.
For sure. And for Tooney this year, he's going to actually, just for the Bears, he'll count only $16 million on the cap. Sure. Obviously, when you trade for a player, it's always cheaper than the incumbent team because all of the signing bonus proration stays with the team that initially signed the contract. So he's got a base of 15.5, and the signing bonus just gets eaten in dead money by Kansas City, and thus add in his $500,000 workout bonus, and you got a $16 million cap hit. But he's on the final year of his deal. And so you just traded a 4th-round pick for 1 year of Joe Tooney or signing him to an extension at 33 years old. So like this is the risk. But what I will give Chicago credit for is part of the reason draft picks are so valuable is because it's cheap talent. They have cheap talent at quarterback, which the Commanders do it too. So it's kind of the like we talked about with Debo. Do you really want to pay Debo $17 million? Maybe not at this stage. Maybe he's worth it if he gets back to 2023 form. Then like he's absolutely worth that. But it's not the ideal number. But like, who cares? You're paying Jaden 1/10 or 1/6, somewhere in between those two, of what you would be paying him on the open market. And so if you have that flexibility, specifically at quarterback of rookie contracts, where do you spend that little bit of extra money? Where you say maybe we sign a guy that we sign him for $18 million, and if we get $15 million of production, we're okay with that because we have the flexibility to eat that. But that $15 million is actually better than taking a $10 million guy and getting $12 million because we need that extra $3 million of production, even if we're overpaying for it. And so are there guys on this free agent list that could be there? Yeah, potentially. But it really does drop off after Stanley. The next offensive tackle, I mean, what Makari from Baltimore, he played both tackle spots. He's at 44 on this top 100.
I think Cam Robinson is the next.
Robinson's 29, something in there. 26 on this list. So, like, and then you're also asking the question about what you're doing with Brandon Coleman. So it's complicated.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is so interesting. And I really can't wait because I think they do make a move, and I would have tried to get it done in free agency, but I think the point of this is that I'm not sure there's a guy here that you love enough to get it done. And so then again, it becomes someone needs to get signed. I don't know when this is going to happen. And they might just be a rotational swing piece. They'll get signed. And then I think you probably need to address it also in the draft if there's somebody like, and then there's also the post draft, cuts that they have every year, and there's people there. So I think that's just an area that I'm just keeping an eye on, because I do think with how well Jaden played last year, receiver to me is slightly less important. It's important. I'm not saying that, but it's slightly less important because I think the number one thing that drives his success is the offensive line. And I will say this too. Cliff did a great job of insulating that group big time last year. Yes. So maybe depending on how they view last year, how they view how Cliff calls games, it's not a huge priority to get the number one top flight guy, but it's something where I think they'll definitely make a move.
For sure. And if they can, I think they can also stylistically make some choices. Maybe this guy's a little weaker as a pass blocker, but we feel good Jaden just gets the ball out, but he's a road grader in the run game, and that's going to make our offense better. You can make stylistic choices. The other big position that obviously we should talk about, and Logan, I don't know if you've seen this, but we have pretty significant breaking news NFL-wise here on the edge, because Max Crosby's now off the market. If you wanted him in a trade, he's not going anywhere. Raiders sign him to a 3-year extension. 106.5 is the number, Logan. He is now the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history.
He's good at football. Yeah. Congratulations to him. That's really exciting. And again, this is weird. Teams are doing a better job year on year of keeping talented pieces around at price tags they feel comfortable with. And, they're going to probably have a rookie quarterback, I would assume, at some point this offseason. I think
certainly not going to have an expensive one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I think, that's good job for Crosby. But I think, again, this goes back to the Myles Garrett thing where everyone's like, oh, we should trade for Myles Garrett. They do not want to let him go. They want him to stay in Cleveland so bad. So don't count, because people understand the importance of keeping generational talents in the building. And that's why you see even some of these guys re-signing as soon as they are in free agencies, because teams know these people are hard to find. So I think it just is, again, congratulations to Crosby, but I think it's reflective of a kind of a smarter NFL with some of these decisions on the whole.
That said, there are some edges available in free agency, and I do wonder if this is an area where Washington spends a little bit of money. Josh Sweat's the top guy. He is the 5th on this list. He's 28 years old. Played, his entire 7-year career with the Eagles. He's been really good. He's got a great celebration with the wipe it off, throw the sweat. I would love to see him in burgundy and gold. I think he's a legitimate one pass rusher. Maybe not a premier one pass rusher, but he instantly becomes their one. You pair him with Dorrance Armstrong. He's a guy I would spend $20 million a year for a 3-year deal on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because how much of his production is reflected because he's playing with one of the best defensive lines in football. And I know that's what people ask and what the criticism is, but if you want good football players, that's probably the price tag you're going to have to kind of investigate there. And I do think there are some other interesting guys like Charles Omenihu from Kansas City. He's a guy that I played with in Houston. I played defensive end. I had to block him. I know how difficult he is because he's an unusual body type. He's got 35.5-inch arms. He's big. He has some inside outside flexibility. And I'm not sure he fits exactly what Dan Quinn wants, to play on the edge. He talks about in his press conference while he's at the combine, the get off is so important, that urgency off the ball, to stress the tackle right away. He's not that guy, but I think he's a heck of a football player. And what I do think is that they do a good job, or they did a good job last year of identifying good football players, kind of whatever that looks like. So even though, I think Sweat would be a great addition, I think there are other guys that kind of catch your fancy a little bit. And you say, in the right situation, the right role, and the right usage could add a ton of value to this team.
Let's do 15, 20 seconds on a couple other names real quick. I don't know how many of these guys you have a deep file on, but interested or not. This guy might be the most interesting guy on the list because Rosenthal writes on NFL.com, he might have been top 5 in this ranking if he had been a free agent in 2024. Hassan Reddick, he got traded to the Jets, contract nightmare, lost season. He's 30, but if he's the guy he was 2 years ago, he's up there with Josh Sweat on this list.
He's probably he's for sure ahead of Josh Sweats. He's a special pass rusher. He's a special football player. He's very, very talented. You saw what he did 2 years ago in Philly. I think the holdout situation to me is just too much, quite frankly, right? It's just, I don't know what I'm getting. And again, I'm a guy who is always a little bit risk leery, risk averse. So even with the Deebo Samuel thing, I'm always like, well, he's been injured, the weight thing, but then I think when you're being an NFL executive, right, you need to think, well, what can this do for our group? And are we okay with the risk? And so with Deebo, obviously, as you look at it, you look at the stats, you look at his role, you look at his usage, you say emphatically, yes. Hassan Reddick is a beast, no doubt about it. But I'm naturally leery of someone who voluntarily didn't play football for a year. Like I'm just leery of that.
I'm not when he didn't play football for the Jets.
That's a fair point. It's a fair point.
If he got in that building was like, this place sucks. Get me out. Like, honestly, that's a plus for me. Other two guys real quick. One different sides of the age spectrum. Do you roll the dice on a Khalil Mack? Because as a player, he's incredible still. He's also 34, and eventually he's going to not be good anymore.
So I think the thing with him is, I think he's good. I think he played well. I think last year was probably one of his better years in the last couple of years, which is great because he's kind of ascending and he sets hard edges. He fills in some of the issues that the Commanders had in terms of defending the run in a nice way, which I like. And he has enough pass rushers. I think maybe this is the inner fan in me. I just want them to sign people with some runway. You know what I mean? I want them to think about signing people that have some legs to the contract. And that's not saying if Khalil Mack ends up getting signed here, I would be very happy because of how he played last year. But I'm also thinking like you're going to kind of run this rat race again next year. And if Adam Peters is okay with it, I'm okay with it because I trust what Adam Peters is doing. I trust his vision. I trust his understanding of the market and the landscape. So that's kind of my one thought on there is I want them to sign somebody. And that's why, again, I mentioned Charles. That's just the name I'm throwing out there, Charles Omenihu. Yeah. Because he's a little bit younger. He's got some runway. He could be here for a couple of years. Now there's some other, he's a little bit of a silly goose sometimes. But if there's a guy that you like that's young that you feel like has upside, like I like the Dorrance Armstrong trade to me or their signing last year, I thought was perfect. He's a young guy with upside that fits your cultural identity and has some pass rush juice and can play 3 downs of football for you. You know what I'm saying? 3 consecutive downs, first, second, third down, and you like it. That to me, I want somebody like that. And
so here, let me throw a name at you then. This guy was on the ascent 2 years ago, missed all of last season with an injury. Malcolm Kuntz. He was in Vegas.
Yeah.
He's 27 years old. Like, that's an interesting one. He's right after Mack on Rosenthal's list. Like, he had 8 sacks a couple years ago, like 17 hurries, I think it was, or 17 pressures, like 40-something tackles. He's a productive player. And then he missed basically all of last season as he's trying to round into form. And, like, this is the thing. When guys are – because I don't think he was a first-round pick. Where was he?
What number is he?
He was number 51 in Vegas. He was –
I'm saying on this list, sorry.
He was, I have too many tabs open, number 23 on this list.
Okay. Yeah, let me just scroll up here really quick so I get a look at him. But yeah, so I love that idea, and I love the idea of buying low off of an injury, especially if it's someone that if it's an injury that me and my medical staff feel comfortable with. I think that's the thing that you got to feel good about. That is, I like the talent, I like the ability. But
third round pick in 2021, just to close that loop, right? And sometimes third round picks, like by year 4, you're starting to really get there. Like that's what you want out of a third round pick. It's just unfortunately in year 4 he was hurt.
Yeah, no, and again, it sounds like he's just based on that description. He's missed more than 1 year, but that's what I'm looking for. I was a big Chris Godwin guy because the ACL injury didn't really bother me for whatever reason. And we're going back to receivers here, but I'm just giving you as an example.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with his play, familiar with his body of work. I know what kind of add he brings to the offense. I know that he's scheme agnostic in terms of his receiving upside. So like that's what I want. And if there's guys like that, like 100%. Let's find a young guy with pass rush juice that fits Dan's vision and bring him in on a 2-year, $15 million deal. Fantastic. Because the upside is going to be great. And you've got him locked in for a couple of years and you can build around that piece. So depending on the medical history with him, that's a perfect example of someone where you get him at a low and then you kind of develop him and you feel comfortable and you see what he can do for you in 2025.
Yeah, so there's a couple names to watch. We'll know a lot more next week because these guys are going to start signing on Monday, and then we have the draft. Wrapping up here on Take Command, little draft peek here at the end, coming off of Combine Week. Everyone's doing their mock drafts, and we wanted to go through one by our pal Dane Brugler of The Athletic because it was super interesting on a lot of fronts. It starts, Logan, the same way that basically every mock draft from every insider is starting now. It seems like the Giants are going to make a trade up to 1. They're going to trade with Tennessee, and they're going to take Cam Ward, the quarterback, out of Miami.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. Like when I haven't done a ton of quarterback evaluation in this draft and for this draft because again, like the Commanders don't need it, so I'm going to waste all my time doing that.
Right.
But in the limited evaluation that I've done of Cam Ward, he seems like he's definitively in a different tier than Shedeur Sanders. I know they've been
Yes.
kind of clumped together since the beginning, and I really think this, and this is one of those things where like you watch a lot of film, you kind of feel that way as you're going through it, and then after the draft, when all the agents meet and stuff, that becomes kind of the definitive piece of information. And so I do think also it shows kind of how desperate New York is and that staff is to kind of maintain and keep their jobs. And so if there's one guy that can turn it around for you in this draft at the quarterback spot, it definitely feels like it's Cam Ward. So I actually would agree with this on the limited eval that I've done. I haven't done my big board yet and all that stuff, but this makes a lot of sense to me. And it, like if Tennessee stayed and picked, I think that's also something very viable. But I do think you sense and feel the urgency from New York in this situation.
For sure. And if I'm Tennessee and I'm not sold on Cam Ward, this is such an easy decision for me.
Yeah.
Like if you think Cam Ward's the guy, you should take him because that's why you have the number 1 overall draft pick is take a quarterback. But if they're like, I don't know, just get a good football player, and then you're probably bad again, and then maybe next year you're back in the same spot. And that's kind of what Houston did, right? They took who is it, Stingley, who's now one of the better corners in all the league, and then they were bad again, and then and especially like I know they probably feel the heat locally in Nashville, just like the Texans probably felt it locally. But like all due respect, you're the Titans, you're a little bit off the national radar. Like it actually buys you a time that, by the way, a team like the Giants don't have. The Giants can't just sit back and be like, because the pressure is so high on them. But if you can sit back for a year and start, I mean, for them, I don't know if they do Levis again, but in Houston, it was Davis Mills, and they were like, we'll give him a couple years. And then they wind up with CJ, and then off they go. They hit the ground running immediately. So I think it's not a bad play to get Travis Hunter, obviously, for them, or Abdul Carter if Cleveland goes another direction. Because I think that's the other interesting thing here about this. Most people still have Cleveland taking a quarterback with Shedeur at 2, but there's also a lot of teams that seem to like they're out on Shedeur. There's a lot of mixed stuff coming out on him. And they're also, Dane was saying yesterday on their show that he thinks there's some teams that are going to have Shedeur as quarterback 3 in this draft. So the gap between Cam and Shedeur might be bigger than Shedeur and the next guy. So you could see him as it is in this draft falling out of the top 10 entirely.
Yeah, and that's something that I think makes a little bit of sense to me. And just from what you're hearing, coming out of the combine, that people weren't that impressed with him. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think when you look at Abdul Carter, like if he's not the first pick, he definitely should be the second pick. And him going to Cleveland like that, and they keep Myles Garrett somehow, like I don't know how you throw the football on that team because you got 2 guys who are really dynamic rushing the passer, right? I think the other thing interesting was Travis Hunter. Had a couple of conversations with people who still are having a hard time classifying and quantifying what he does, because they're like, in a normal, if he was just a receiver, he wouldn't be a top 10 player. If he's just a corner, is he a top 10 player? And that was an interesting conversation to have with people. And because he's doing both, he's a top 5 player. So I think that's an interesting kind of, we've talked about that a little bit, but
yeah, I think it's worth mentioning though. There are some of the analyst types that I talked to that came on the show that are like, that dude would be the number 1 corner for me in this draft by a lot. So like there are mixed reviews on him, especially as a corner, and people that think that he's like a dude at that outside corner position.
And that's and I agree with that. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I do think there seems to be a slight disconnect. And I think it's because of his technical inefficiencies at the position between NFL people that I talk to and, like media people that I talk to. So
interesting.
Just take that nugget.
Interesting. So Hunter goes 3 in this one. Armand Membu, first tackle off the board, first O-lineman off the board. He goes 4 to the Patriots instead of Will Campbell, who goes 5 to Jacksonville. I feel like that was another thing coming out of the week. There's just a lot more people that think Membu is definitely a tackle. Campbell might be a guard. And he's a freak athletically. And even though he's young, he's only 20 years old, he's super mature on and off the field. So, like, what is there not to like?
Yeah, and just, again, seeing, this is one of the things about the Combine that is probably a pro and a con, is seeing them next to each other. It's like,
yeah, you mentioned this on the show earlier in the week.
Yeah, one of these guys looks like an NFL tackle. One of them doesn't. And Armand Membu just fit the bill, right? He measured well, he ran well, he moved well, and he's big. He's huge. He's thick in the torso. He's got big arms, big bones. So I think that's one of the pros maybe of coming out of the Combine for him, is that people got to see him next to the other big time guys, and he just looks the part.
For sure. Ashton Genty at 6 to Vegas. That's interesting for sure. Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, to the Jets at 7. Shamar Stewart, who in our PFF inspired mock that we did, somehow fell to the Commanders at 29 in our mock draft 1.0. We told you that was not going to happen. Here he goes 8 to Carolina. Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State, goes 9 to New Orleans. And then Tyler Booker, guard. This probably is not going to happen because Dane did this a couple days ago, and now all of a sudden, Tooney and Jackson have been traded for. But it tells you what kind of talent Tyler Booker is, the guard out of Alabama at 10.
And I think it shows you also the value of the meetings because his film's good. He's a good football player, and again, he was my highest rated interior player for sure. But every single person that talked with him, that came out of a meeting with him, just said he is the teammate. He's the best teammate in this class. He's the best leader at the offensive line position outside of maybe Will Campbell. And that's where you see the value of that intangible stuff showing up in the meetings, I think.
All right, 11 through 21. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
Mykel Williams, edge out of Georgia, goes 11 to San Francisco. Tet McMillan, he's your first receiver off the board, 12 to the Cowboys, playing opposite of CeeDee Lamb. Nick Amanawari, the safety from South Carolina, 13 to Miami. Hearing Dane talk about him on their show, Dane clearly got some intel that teams love this dude. The competitiveness, the intelligence, on top of the fact that he was the freak of all freaks from a size, weight, speed standpoint.
Yeah, and I'm still kind of on the fence with him with regards to the film, in my opinion. Like, and it's probably a little bit of like stereotype. You see a big dude, I want him to violently want to hit people. But in terms of movement skills, it's all there on film. He can play man coverage. He's got good instincts in the pass game. He runs well. He's a decent tackler in space. Don't watch the Alabama game. It's his worst game of the year. He looks terrible in that game. But other games over the course of this year, you see that ability. And I don't know, man. He's special. He's unicorn special. And so obviously, like, this seems a little bit a touch high for me personally. But again, when you see an athlete like that and the film supports it, it makes a little bit of sense, I think.
Yeah, especially when you hear Dane talk about like his teammates, the way they talked about him. I think there's a tight end from South Carolina in this draft, and Dane was talking to him at the combine, and he was basically like, "Yeah, playing that dude in practice was terrible. Like, he's so smart. He's always where he needs to be. Communicates really well. So there's just a ton of stuff to like for Nick Amanawari, someone who in a lot of mocks was around for Washington to pick at 29. Here he goes 13. Colston Loveland, tight end, Michigan, goes 14 to Indianapolis. Jalen Walker, edge, goes to the Falcons. They finally get an edge. Donovan Ezaraku, edge, he goes to the Cardinals. Will Johnson, corner, to the Bengals. Jihad Campbell, linebacker, to the Seahawks. Mike Green, edge, goes to Tampa, which just feels right from the uniform. Like, that dude's like a big, angry dude, and he's going to play for the Bucs. Of course he is. Omarion Hampton, the running back out of UNC, to the Broncos at 20. I think that's going to be a very popular mock selection. And then Shador winds up going 21, and that's how Pittsburgh solves their quarterback problem. Shador to the Steelers.
Yeah, and I just think it's interesting kind of like how deep this defensive class is. You know, the ability for Ezaraku to rush the passer, for Walker to rush the passer. Like, again, I'm a little bit out on Walker at the moment because he measured really unusual. He's under 6'2". He's about 240 pounds. He's got short arms, but the juice is in film, right? So it shows up there. And to see Mike Green going again outside the top 15 feels right to me personally. But again, he's going to be a dynamic pass rusher. Jihad Campbell can rush the passer, and then have the second running back go at 20 is also kind of surprising. But again, I think it just speaks to the positions of strength, defensive line and running back in this class.
For sure. And there's no offensive linemen in that group. So, like, you have the couple, you have, or I should say the three, Membu, Campbell, and Booker go in the top 10. But now all of a sudden you got the linemen that are getting pushed down, and that's going to create an interesting situation for Washington at 29. 22, Matthew Golden his 4.2940 going to the Chargers. The wide receiver from Texas, Derek Harmon, defensive tackle to Green Bay. Kelvin Banks, the tackle, maybe guard from Texas, to the Vikings. Gary Zabel, one of the best interior linemen in this draft, played a lot of center, might be a guard. He goes to the Houston Texans. Emeka Egbuka, God, if he goes to the Rams, that just feels so Ramsey.
It'd be perfect for them.
Just like the most professional receiver in the draft, and he's going to go play for Sean. Of course he is.
And he plays like both those guys. He plays like Cooper Kupp in his prime. He plays like Puka Nacua. Like that. Like, I remember watching him, I was like, this is, if he goes to LA, that's where he should go. That's where he should live because he's a heck of a football player.
Jahdae Barron, speedster, DB. He goes to the Ravens at 27. Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle, to the Lions at 28, which means your guy, Logan, Josh Simmons, falls, the tackle from Ohio State, all the way down to 29 for Washington. Real quick, just to round it out, Maxwell Hairston and his 4.2, whatever he ran, 4.2, 840 to the Bills. Josh Connerly, tackle from Oregon, to the Chiefs, and then Walter Nolan, defensive tackle, would replace Milton Williams for the Eagles. But this is both encouraging and discouraging, I think, on the Josh Simmons front. It's encouraging because, hey, maybe the Commanders have a shot at the guy who you think might be the best pure tackle in this class. But the only reason he's getting this far is because the medical clearly scared some teams if Dane's dropping him this low.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, like, I would defer to Dane because he's really dialed in and really connected. But anybody you talk to, like any scouts, front office people, like I say, who's the best tackle? It's like, oh, Josh Simmons. Like that's kind of definitive. So obviously, if he's here at 29, I'm really happy. But I'm also a little bit, my heart's kind of doing a little flutter because I'm like, well, where's he at with the medical? If he's here, does he need a red shirt for a year? What's the development look like? Is he ever going to be back to that same athlete that he was before? I don't know, but this is awesome. This would be awesome for the Washington Commanders because he reminds me of Darisaw. He reminds me of, kind of that the movement skills of Trent. Like, they're not the same player, but like that's the kind of athlete that he is. And so of all these guys we just talked about, I think Membu could be special at tackle. I also think Josh Simmons could be special at tackle. So for the command, and again, like Connerly goes 31. So obviously both those guys are still here. I think both those guys would be excellent selections for Washington, no doubt. But if I had a preference of maybe anybody in this whole class, it'd probably be, Membu or Josh Simmons. So for him to be here at 29, I think is a pretty fantastic thing, especially given all that conversation we just had about how hard it is to find elite offensive linemen in free agency.
For sure. And it's worth mentioning, there's a couple other tackles that are also available, including like his teammate, Donovan Jackson, who, when I asked Lance Zierlein, like, of these guard tackle guys, if you had to bet on one to play tackle, he's like, I'd bet on Jackson. Like, I know he played a ton of guard, but like, I think that dude's a tackle. And so there are some evaluators that have been doing this a long time that really think he is a legit bona fide starting NFL tackle, and he's still available as well. So if the board falls like this and the Commanders have their choice of tackles at 29, there are a lot worse ways that this can go for Washington. I think you'd love to have maybe some of the edge guys still available, and Dane has a run in the teens, but if that pushes down a bunch of O-linemen, sick. Go get your left tackle, move Coleman inside, and that be that. That's our show for today. We'll be back next week. We don't really know when. We're going to see how some of this first day of free agency pans out. Obviously, Monday is when the league year, the tampering period opens, so guys can sign on Wednesday is when the league year officially opens. So I could say guys can agree on Monday, sign on Wednesday. Trades can go through, including the Debo trade. And that happens at 4 o'clock. Lucky me, I host a radio show that starts then. I'll catch y'all on the radio between now and then. Again, on the team at 9:80, 4 to 7 for the Hoffman Show. You can also get more from Logan, Command Center podcast, and more from the Commanders. For Logan Paulsen, I'm Craig Hoffman. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.